I wanted to take a moment to talk about risk management and GitOps. So if you're not familiar with risk management, what is risk management? Why do people need risk management? That sort of a thing. It's designed, it's basically a process for identifying and assessing your basically risks associated with your organization and then prioritizing whatever those risks are. So if anyone's ever heard of GRC, when we hear of like governance, risk, and compliance, oftentimes you hear of risk management in association with GRC. So if you work in the world of compliance, deal with things like audits and stuff like that, then one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is DevSecOps, and then things like GitOps. So, what does DevSecOps have to do with risk management? What does GitOps have to do with risk management? Those are some good questions. So if we think about the idea of GRC and things like risk management, we tend to have to deal with audits. And so if you've ever run a business and you've been I don't know, even I guess what's one thing that even standard consumers have that's sort of an audit? You could think of like taxes as kind of like an audit that you don't even have to own a business to have to be required to go through. So if anyone's ever heard of like a tax audit, when you're running a company, there's more than just tax audits. You have compliance audits, risk audits, all these different types of audits. And it can be a real nightmare to sort of like figure out how to manage your processes for these, sorts of things like GRC, risk management. It can be really time-consuming stuff, and it can require a lot of individuals and large, complicated teams. So having something that we could refer to as like a source of truth. So if we think about the context of DevSecOps, one of the things that is associated with DevSecOps is something called Git, or we could think of GitOps. Now, DevSecOps, that has to do with the idea of sort of adding security into the DevOps process. So if you've ever heard of DevOps is a philosophy for how we can develop applications in a continuous fashion. But if we add, the sec for DevSecOps, then we talk about doing things in a secure fashion. And then when we're talking about adding the security aspects to a DevOps environment or DevOps pipeline, when we get into things like security, all of a sudden we have to care about governance as well as security oftentimes. So if you're dealing with security, then you're probably also dealing with security controls associated with your risk management, your compliance, and things like that as well. And there's usually some crossover with that sort of thing. So then let's introduce GitOps, which GitOps is something that is part of the process if we're thinking of like DevSecOps, where we're using Git, which is, we could see it as a source of truth, right? So Git, if we have a source of truth and we want to have like a central way to manage our, say, audits or reviews or code reviews, submissions, and things like that, GitOps gives us a streamlined, well-centralized management resource that makes it easy for us to go through audits, basically. And so if you organize companies' risk management structure and all of that good stuff in, say, GitOps or Git repositories using GitHub or GitLab, that sort of a thing, and then you save, say, like configurations as code or infrastructure as code. When we start saving things like system configurations as code, then that suddenly turns into, when now we're talking some GitOps stuff. So you can save compliance or risk management configurations as code. And then when we're saving something in code, then we might be saving it in Git. The joy of doing things in this fashion is that you can then automate painful efforts or otherwise potentially boring things. So by using GitOps and by using things like configurations as code, then you can just centralize all of the madness. So anyways, some thoughts for today. Thanks for listening.